it's always a competition. So people are always looking at, well, what is the culture of another place?
Do you think that mix kind of makes it more libertarian?
Connecting it to the money printing, connecting it to the debasement, connecting it to the sovereignty and the freedom.
I feel like the nation states or smaller states are the next one to jump into this game.
Bitcoin's difficult to see, but for those people that have already seen it, it's easy to see the path. Maybe 1% of the people understand Bitcoin, but the 1% of people that understand Bitcoin understand why the 99% are going to need it. So the 1% of people that see Bitcoin can already see the benefits of a place like El Salvador.
Welcome to Citizen X Podcast. Today we're sitting down with Parker Lewis. Parker, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Excited to record.
Let's do it. So Parker is an author of Gradually Then Suddenly book, previously series of articles. That was my go-to first send for people. And also now you're currently business development at Zep, right? Is that right?
Correct. Working on Bitcoin payments.
That's right. Parker, you're local through and through. We're recording here in Austin, Texas, by the way, and you were born and raised in Texas.
Correct. Born and raised in Austin.
Okay. How many generations Texan?
So only third generation.
Only.
Yeah. We've got some friends who are like 7th or 8th generation in the Bitcoin space. So,
well, I feel like in our friend group, there's probably one person that was born and raised in Austin, so it's very rare these days. I actually want Texas to be like the highlight of this podcast. Texas is a very unique state, in my opinion. I feel like out of all the states and all the places in the U.S., Austin has been attracting the most amount of Bitcoiners. Would you agree?
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think there's something unique in it. I think it's true. I think it's also attracting a group of, the next wave of Bitcoiners who don't know that they're Bitcoiners. That there's something that's attracting a certain type of person to Central Texas.
So what is driving it as of right now? The current existing community or the policies, the state structure, etc.?
I'd say it inevitably has to be a confluence of reasons that has to do with the culture, that has to do with the people, that has to do with the people that over the last several hundred years Texas has attracted and continues to attract, and that then guides policy. And so I would say that those things are related.
Mm-hmm.
But that also, it's always a competition. So people are always looking at, well, what is the culture of another place and what are the policies of that other place? And then there's also something that's, I'd say, the energy dynamics that exist here. But part of those energy dynamics exist because of the culture. Yeah. Because there's a lot of places that have a lot of energy, and not every place that has a lot of energy develops as much energy.
When I first moved to Austin 4 years ago, I went on a tour around the city, and the tour guide said, well, Austin is a blueberry in a tomato soup, talking about the more of a liberal city in a Republican state. Do you think that mix kind of makes it more libertarian?
I think that it creates an interesting dynamic, because I think it is a blue city in a red state, but also the state capital is here, and that creates a more conservative bent or anchor in a liberal city, which is fairly unique, I'd say. Because if you say like Houston, also blue, Dallas, also blue, but it doesn't have the capital that is conservative. So I think that it creates an interesting melting pot of people of people that might be interested to come to Austin that if they were looking at other cities, might go elsewhere.
Yeah, I was thinking culturally, like a full-on Democrat, diehard Democrat would not move to Texas. And a diehard Republican would not move to Austin. So it's like people have preferences, people have beliefs, yet they're not this like so brainwashed by politics that they're not able to see anything else.
Yeah. I'll just give you like one anecdote that reinforces that. I was talking to a friend's wife that is a Bitcoiner, and this was like 2021 or 2020. It was like, oh, we'd never moved to Texas. They treat their women like Taliban, you know? And so you're like, okay, like there's a filter that keeps, certain people out, and then other people that look closer understand it. And so I do think I had never thought of the way that you framed it there, but that is probably a fairly accurate way to look at maybe what is being an overarching compounding filter of people that actually come to Austin.
Let me take down my hijab so I can speak in the microphone. Okay. Now let's talk policy. I was at the original SBR meeting here in Texas Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. And I realized that the chairman himself seemed like as orange-pilled as it gets. Like, he was full on Bitcoiner. Is that accurate?
I don't have any direct personal knowledge of that. I listened to the hearing, and I would agree that the way that he was talking about it and talking specific to Bitcoin, that he was further down his journey than most politicians. I'd say most politicians have no concept of the real why behind Bitcoin, and it's not every politician. It's just, we're talking 99, 98%. And, connecting it to the money printing, connecting it to the debasement, connecting it to the sovereignty and the freedom, and then drawing, even though I would say he wasn't firm in his drawing of the distinction between Bitcoin and everything else, focusing his discussion on Bitcoin and the finite supply. So, and most, I would say most politicians that draw some interest in Bitcoin are way more fluid because they don't have that grounding into the why you would be wanting to consider this.
All right. And is that right that Texas is currently a profitable state, like net positive?
In surplus.
In surplus.
Now, what I would say is Texas as a state does have debt. There's currently a budget surplus. Okay. And so, and I believe on like a per capita basis, it's got a very, relatively low debt, but there is, debt that exists that's owed by the state of Texas.
Yeah, the chairman himself was totally calling out the fact that we're borrowing from future generations, that the money printer keeps going, and the Texas is not signing up for that. That was kind of refreshing to hear, not from a Bitcoin pleb, but from a politician sitting out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I want to say, like, currently, I don't know the total amount of debt that the state has, but it's got like 165 billion in treasury, and I believe its run rate annual surplus is like 20 to 30 billion.
Okay. So, I've seen the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve launching in different cities and states. As of right now, it is not in motion in Texas. Is that right?
Correct. Currently in the state of Texas, it's passed the Senate. So I think the hearing you were talking about is Senator Schwartner's bill, SB 21. It is being taken up in the House and is advancing down the House, but it hasn't passed the House. Expectation is that if it passes the House, then it will be signed. I think there's one other state that hasn't passed through both the Senate and that, but it's not as like Bitcoin centric.
Okay. And the biggest question at the hearing is what prevents us from allocating capital to Bitcoin right now? And it seems like the whatever money guy was like, well, I kind of need green light on that because it seems like a risky asset, although I'm signing up for that myself, but I am talking about the treasury of the state. So is that simply like they can't allocate it right now because they just want this agreement?
What I would say is that my interpretation is, given Bitcoin's nascency, given the fact that few people understand Bitcoin, that having the legislature explicitly sign off on it gives the treasurer CYA, cover your ass, to have a more direct mandate to do it. And so, I think generally there could always be a case made, but then scrutiny comes. That could, and better to do it one way, to have the explicit direction, than the other, I think, is the approach that they're taking.
But once let's say it passes, then the allocation will come from the current treasury, or what's the plan of actually funding it? They did talk about donations, and people are like, who would donate to the state?
My understanding is that it would come from the current treasury.
Okay.
And not for this podcast, but otherwise, I looked at, I believe I'm accurate on that. I believe it's $165 billion in total for the state. And I believe currently $12 billion of that is cash or cash equivalents. And so it's this recognition that the state, realistically, there might be some strategic reasons to say hold gold, like gold is part of the state's holdings, part of that $165 billion. There's probably 25% of it that is bonds. Mm-hmm. That bonds that are just losing their real purchasing power because of dollar inflation. And so there is this reality that the state's already allocating funds outside of just cash. And then it's, well, what is appropriate for the state to hold, because it is the taxpayers' money, right? Like, a fair way to think about it is like any cash that a company holds, there has to be a reason for the company to hold the cash. Otherwise, it should dividend it to its members or shareholders. The same idea exists for the citizenry of Texas, which is if the state is holding what are deemed to be excess funds, you should otherwise just distribute it. So make an argument of why the holdings that the state holds in its treasury on behalf of the citizenry of Texas should be holding one asset versus another. And so my understanding is that it would be a reallocation and that the treasurer makes, within margin certain calls of that, as well as there's current year budget surpluses, that funds would be devoted from that surplus to, a portion of it being Bitcoin.
Definitely. So I'm working on this concept of Bitcoin per citizen, or sats per citizen. And I feel like we recently got introduced to the concept of Bitcoin per share with 21 Money and Strategy. Well, I believe while the companies issue shares to buy Bitcoin and the race of institutions has officially begun, I feel like the nation states or smaller states are the next one to jump into this game. And obviously, El Salvador has already been doing it, buying one Bitcoin every day. And I feel like in this next wave of economic freedom, this true privatization of property through Bitcoin, just like we've seen nation states take this economic freedom step and clearly winning the race to economic prosperity. Now the next wave is like, how much can nation states stack? How much Bitcoiners can they really attract to live in? Because that will determine Bitcoin per citizen in the country. So what El Salvador is doing, they're currently issuing citizenships to buy Bitcoin. As of today, the citizenship of El Salvador costs 10.5 Bitcoin, basically $1 million.
That's a lot of Bitcoin.
That's a lot of Bitcoin. And the same way, that's the whole sovereign individual thesis, right? The states will start attracting capital, start attracting them with better policies, better price, better services. And through this process, there will be microstates emerging from that. Because let's say, like right now, Texas is pretty aligned with the overall current administration. Let's say 4 years from now, AOC takes the office. Totally just out of the blue saying it. Texan is going to be not on the same page with the current office, and we get back to the talks of Texas seceding. I believe Texas is in a very special position for that, given its geographical location, giving having a surplus in the budget, um, and giving that it has not always been a state. So, like, how probable this Texas? Okay, not how probable. Let's even say, if we ever get there, how would Texas seceding look like? What would it cost in terms of civil unrest in a country overall? And even like, actually, is it possible?
Yeah. So, well, what I would say is, for a quick, like, maybe we could do like a quick history lesson on just the history of Texas being in the United States. So Texas, I believe the year that Texas joined the United States was 1846. Texas fought for and won its independence in 1836, so 10 years prior. And one of the key figures in that fight for independence and in the period when Texas was independent was Sam Houston. So Sam Houston was a disciple of Andrew Jackson, who was a former president of the United States. He was also a senator from Tennessee, potentially the governor of Tennessee, and I believe a general in the U.S. Army. So, like, a lot of history with the U.S. And he was the general of the Texas Army when it was fighting for its independence, and then ultimately winning its independence. He was a big proponent of Texas joining the United States. And there was a treaty between the United States and Mexico that preceded Texas joining the United States, that Texas would never be admitted to the United States. And then, and it was interesting because one reading of history is because Sam Houston was always somebody that was supportive of Texas joining the United States. He has this famous quote that was, Texas doesn't need the United States needs Texas. But he was still a big proponent of Texas being part of the Union. And a big part of the resistance in Washington of admitting Texas was because it was known all along that Sam Houston was a big proponent of it, that, with this treaty between Texas and Mexico, like, was this always the plan, and would this lead to war? Ultimately, there would be a Spanish-American War, or Mexican-American War. But then, so Sam Houston was the general of the Army when they won independence. He was the first president of Texas. And then there was a second president of Texas, and then I think Sam Houston was president again. But it was actually, one reading of history is this guy, Maribel Lamar, who was the other president of Texas when Texas was independent, was that he started talking about Texas going west and basically annexing the western part of the United States. And again, it's just one reading of history, was that it was actually that manifest destiny that convinced Washington to say, oh, well, we can't have, a superpower on our border. We need to annex Texas. And that was what actually spurred the annexation of Texas. And then fast forward to the Civil War, Sam Houston was very against secession in general, but also against, and he was governor of Texas, I believe, at the time, or at least he then had been governor of Texas after Texas had joined the Union. And his principal argument for being against secession was that there was a remedy in the Constitution, that Texas should challenge it at the Supreme Court, and if what the Union was doing was unconstitutional, that there was a path to that. And so, in general, I'll talk. So I wanted to have that setting. In general, my perspective is like, people should, read into and rely heavily on what the founders thought was important, because they were the ones that were actually there and fighting. and that they might know better than us. And so one of the ideas that runs through my head is Sam Houston thought very strongly that Texas should not secede, and that it was important for Texas to be a part of the union, and that there was a value in that union. That should be the default strong position until something categorically changes. Second thing is, it's like Texas does have this position of strength within the union for reasons beyond just politics, but because of its assets, and because of its borders, and because of trade, that there's a lot of power that can be wielded, in negotiation. And then the third thing is, I think that this would apply to any state that wanted to secede. That never happens peacefully.
Yeah.
The communists that want to force their fair and just rules on non-communists never let the people that just want to live their own way to go in peace.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just a reality as well.
It's really good to talk about all that now, including the history lesson, because 2 days ago, Canadian election happened, and Alberta is currently preparing a referendum for Alberta seceding Canada.
Yeah, I saw that.
There's a lot of proponents of joining the U.S. There are a lot of people who just want to first run the referendum and show Canada that Alberta actually does want out. And I'm in this unique position. I don't need to read the news. By the amount of application and scheduled calls from a certain jurisdiction, I can spot that something is going on.
Yeah.
So yesterday was like notification after notification from Canada. So with this ability to secede, but still always rooting for not secession, it's the whole concept of the idea of having a gun is not having to use it. So it's like, hopefully it will never fire, but I have it in my pocket. And
Right.
That's a good position to have. The question is Alberta in this position of like, yeah, we're strong, we are able to leave, and there is the United States that can potentially say, yeah, welcome over here. What are your readings on that?
So I think the dynamics would be similar in the respect of like, okay, you have all these assets, you have this negotiating power, but if in the case of Alberta, if they don't have their own military, then you have this imbalance, and that you would ultimately need an ally like the United States to prevent the communists that don't want you to leave from not being able to go to war with you, to then allow you to do that. And then maybe that stalking horse allows for a negotiation to happen that otherwise wouldn't or couldn't happen.
Yeah. Me having lived through experience of a nearby country running a referendum and certain states leaving their previous nation and joining Russia, and how it all unfolded in the following years makes me think that, are we at the steps of a next geopolitical disaster between the U.S. and Canada? Like, is it going to be bad? Does that smell bad?
I would say, like, we need to get a Canadian in to talk. It's like, I'm sure that it's like, I think that there are interesting dynamics that are parallel where, say we live in Texas and changes were made over the past 4 years that directly impacted us at the border, where, and it was an interesting dynamic where basically Governor Abbott had dispatched the Texas Guard or Texas National Guard to the border, and then there wasn't a standoff, but there was a potential crisis between basically U.S. interests at the border and personnel and Texan personnel, and then it just disappeared quietly, and no one really speaks of it again. But if you think about like just like I would hate to speak about Canadian interests with not being a Canadian.
Yeah.
But there are similarities between Alberta and Texas, and so speaking from a perspective of Texas, saying, hey, we have this border that hundreds of thousands of people are being allowed to come across, and you're not doing anything about it, and you're telling us that we can't do anything about it. Like, that is a massive problem. And that if that had persisted, that ultimately there becomes a tipping point where you say, no, are you kidding me? We have to secure our own interests. And in the state of Texas, and I don't know this about Canada, that the states are sovereign, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, if that is true in Canada, but I do see the parallels. So there becomes a tipping point where you would just say enough is enough. At some point, freedom is what actually matters to us the most, and our whole history in this country says that at some point you have to fight for that, and that might happen there, but not being from there and not truly appreciating the dynamics. I don't want to pontificate too much.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, definitely. All right, how does Texas end up in a position of even more power now that we have Bitcoin capital of the world here in Austin? You as the Bitcoin mayor of Austin.
De facto.
Just for those who don't know, that's how Parker is referred to in Austin, Texas. Is it ever in the cards for you?
I could see it potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say only after the battle of Bitcoin is won, or the battle of the money. I think that if we don't fix the money, everything else is economically, political stabilization, from a political stabilization standpoint, economic stabilization standpoint, everything is kind of beyond that, or derivative to that. And so I just view that as the most important problem, and that it's where my time is best spent, and where my interests lie the most, because I'm not interested in an active way in being in politics. Yeah. Like it's not something that I look at and say, oh, I'd enjoy, getting knifed in that fight. That being said, I'm from Austin, and there are things about the way that Austin is run that I don't like, and that, if it's clear that Bitcoin is the global standard of value, and that is set or clearly on its path, then I would have an interest to help make Austin a better place. I'd probably have an interest before that in getting someone that I like and trust to do it, but that also, I like, in a very tangible way, I've thought that, hey, if my highest and best use of my own time and personal interests are less in one place, that it would be something that I would do, because even though I wouldn't be interested in all of like the tangible politics of like city council and all that bullshit, that making Austin a better place to live would be something that I would be interested in devoting time to.
Appreciate that. All right, so first you were, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm much later Bitcoiner than you are, but your initial focus
I wouldn't
was...
say that. I think we're close.
Okay, maybe. So first you basically focused on education, economical education of Bitcoin values. Then you focused on custody with Unchained. Now you're focused on payments and commerce of Bitcoin. So what's your current thing in Bitcoin that you're truly trying to work on, put most of your effort and time into?
Yeah, and maybe I'd like shift. It's like Bitcoin clicked for me. I realized that Bitcoin was money. I started the way that my thought process of it was the first service, or the most important thing next to money is how you secure it.
Mm-hmm.
That if you if I would say if Bitcoin's valuable because it has this fixed supply and it has this property of being censorship resistant and permissionless, and its fixed supply and its censorship resistance are really hand in glove, that if it was possible to censor, then you couldn't enforce its fixed supply. So not stating that they're not very related, but that, hey, there's a scarcity here. It's what allows Bitcoin to store value. If you could lose that, then the scarcity and Bitcoin's not of value to you. So that custody was a most important foundational problem to work on. And then during that process, my views of Bitcoin just got hardened, and I started writing about Bitcoin, and then I turned that into a book and got more into the education side as my own knowledge became hardened and refined. And then in 2023, I had stepped back to turn my writing into a book. And in the middle of that process, there was a slew of bank failures in the United States, most notably Silicon Valley Bank, which was a $200 billion deposit bank and failed virtually overnight. That bank runs, or one of the ways I think about it is the Great Financial Crisis in 2008 demonstrated how fragile the financial system is. In 2025, the financial system is just as fragile, but it's far more digital, so that when the run occurs, it can collapse far faster. And Silicon Valley Bank was patient zero of making that very clear. And that the first thing that most people thought when they looked at that situation, because there were a lot of businesses that banked with Silicon Valley Bank, and it basically, stock got halted on a Friday, and then there was a question of what happens by Monday morning. FDIC is going to take it over, but do people have access to their deposits? And very logically, the first question was, how do I make payroll? If I'm a bank, if I'm a business that banks with them, I've got expenses that I have to pay. I've got people I've got to pay. But banks are also how people receive their money. It's functionally their access to their customers. And where my mind went was, well, what would you work on if reliable access to the U.S. banking system or any banking system was no longer a given? Because the fragility, I knew that it always existed, that it never went away. But when you're working day to day, you can kind of be lulled to sleep in terms of just how clear and present the problem is. And that kind of heightened in my mind, okay, this, we have a lot less time than most people think. And when I looked at the problem, I said, hey, the thing that's most exposed here in Bitcoin is direct access to customers, and or direct, if you're a business, how you're being paid, or if you're an individual, how you receive payment. Like that Bitcoin functionally, while there was, is, and continues to be some small amount of payments activity in Bitcoin, that it's the least developed by far aspect of it. And so that's what caused me to really shift my attention to the payment side of Bitcoin, and that's where I focus, outside of working on my book and getting my book out there and doing some education. We're working at ZapRight on enabling Bitcoin payments. We do that by enabling fiat side by side with Bitcoin and delivering tools to make it easy, but with this recognition that Bitcoin doesn't work if you have to go into the US banking system or into a European banking system to then access the real economy. I'm not someone that looks at it and says, oh, Bitcoin's going to fail if not for this. It's just that it's path dependent. All the economic incentives dictate that it will be built, and it's the least developed, so it's the most logical thing for me to work on right now.
Well, it works for me. I've been a user of ZapRight for a few months now. Received a couple payments today.
Nice. Maybe for some Canadians.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, it's just that when you think about Bitcoin as a system, yes, it's this 21 million fixed supply. It is valuable because it represents a form of money that can't be printed. It is permissionless. It is resistant to censorship. But it's also this closed loop system. And that if you begin to understand why Bitcoin has fundamental value in its finite supply, in its scarcity, then it becomes very logical to say, well, yeah, people are buying and selling it for dollars, but if I want it, why would I not want for my customers, if I'm delivering a service, to be able to pay me directly, to remove the most amount of friction, both in terms of a central checkpoint, but also just in terms of an extraneous cost to me to be able to take that directly.
Yep.
And so there's this very logical order. It's yes, you do have to have some appreciation for Bitcoin as a medium of why it would store value. But once you get there as a business owner, if you're not thinking, I should just be paid in this directly because then I can cut out all the fiat fees and it just de-risks my business. If something does happen from the fragility of the financial system sooner than I thought, then my customers actually have a path to pay me for my service. And if the alternative was wait until the fragility reappears, wait until you get cut off from your customers in the banking system, and then you start trying to figure out Bitcoin payments, it's just not the way that somebody that's high agency thinks about risk.
Yeah.
And so that's also why, it gives me great confidence that people are going to figure this out because they're going to need it to survive.
Definitely. And on top of it, as of right now, the community is small, but using Bitcoin as go-to-market, what's been working for many. Like for me personally, Plan B Passport never run ads. All I was doing is tweeting for 6 years. But I was directly talking to Bitcoiners. I was directly servicing Bitcoiners, and they appreciated it because obviously I know their pain points. I know I can provide them with better service than anybody else who doesn't know that audience. And same goes for new businesses. If you first bring the product to those who you know the most, that's the easiest go-to-market strategy always. And that's what you guys are using right now. You're not trying yet to go mainstream and bring on those businesses that never heard of Bitcoin.
Right.
You're servicing Bitcoiners because Bitcoin business owners, that's what they're going to do. They're going to accept payment through bank. They're going to pay bank fees. Then they're going to create an account on exchange, transfer money from their bank to exchange, pay those fees to buy Bitcoin, and then transfer it out to their cold storage.
Yeah, and in many cases, because your customers are logically Bitcoiners, a Bitcoiner might have to sell the Bitcoin to get the fiat, to then pay the fiat fees, to then have you pay the exchange fees to get back in.
Yeah.
And that is, I think that people are realizing this. Like, from our standpoint, it's like, why build payments for people that don't understand Bitcoin? It's just the wrong logical order. You can try to swim upstream and say, well, there's this, for your industry, there's this reason that Bitcoin solves a problem. But all of those cases are because of some like regulatory choke point. And it doesn't make Bitcoin any easier. I wouldn't say that. When Canadian truckers get cut off from their bank accounts, that helps somebody understand Bitcoin. But they have to pair it with some prior knowledge of Bitcoin, of why. And that, it's not just that the person that understands Bitcoin is the logical first person to adopt Bitcoin payments, is that they actually have customers that will pay them. That it's a two-sided equation. Because if a Bitcoiner is a customer of a fiat business and they still have fiat, they're much more logically to just pay in fiat. But then also that's extending because there's a network effect. The way that we think about it is all of your customers, not all of them, but a lot of them are Bitcoiners. If they're paying you and they're seeing Zaprat exposed and then they have a business, that there's a network effect, there's a distribution that makes sense. But then if you go further removed, I was talking to Ben Justman from Peony Lane Wines, and his whole marketing strategy is to Bitcoiners, and you're like, well, why? It's wine. Everybody drinks wine, but not everybody is willing to change their consumption model or appreciate how he's doing it, and he thinks that Bitcoiners will, and from what he's seen, they do. But there are other businesses that quote have nothing to do with Bitcoin. I've been talking to the founder owner of what's Local Pastures,
Mm-hmm.
who they accept Bitcoin online, but then trying to work on figuring out how to implement it in store because their customers are Bitcoiners.
Yep.
Like the people that will shift their behavior to either make another trip from the big box grocery store to go buy beef and other kind of farm to table products. The Bitcoiners are the ones that will value that, and they're the ones that will change their behavior. And so it's just really it's like the idea of aiming small and missing small to say, okay, this is the most logical audience to adopt Bitcoin payments. Rather than try to develop tools for people that don't understand Bitcoin, let's build out to the market that does and make sure that we're giving the tools to them, because you just have to accept that it's a small market that's going to grow organically, and that you're not going to get there if you're delivering Bitcoin payments tools to people that don't get Bitcoin.
Yep. And if now you dominate the Bitcoin space and Bitcoin is going to dominate the economics as a system, then Bitcoin growth will take care of your business growth too.
Agree. That's the other thing. It's like this space might be small. It's going to grow faster than everything else because Bitcoin is growing faster than everything else. Because people are figuring out that they have this problem, that is, their money's being printed or their bank accounts are being censored, and that even if the people that adopt Bitcoin payments are downstream, that top of funnel is like, that's the way the world's going. We know it because we're already here. So let's get to the place where everyone's going.
Yep. And then again, this race between states. Now, obviously not all U.S. states are going to adopt strategic Bitcoin reserves. We have few states that are clearly further along the lines in this process. Let's say in the next 2 years, Texas joining that, few more states joining it. In how many years will we recognize that and start studying it in history books, because it will be truly visible that they made the right choice and now you made the consequences?
Yeah, the one way or one saying is that history is written by the winners, and that I think one way to look at Bitcoin for somebody that's in it, and again, Bitcoin's difficult to see, but for those people that have already seen it, it's easy to see the path. It's like maybe 1% of the people understand Bitcoin, but the 1% of people that understand Bitcoin understand why the 99% are going to need it. And so the 1% of people that see Bitcoin can already see the benefits of a place like El Salvador or a place like Texas. So they're evaluating the field and they can draw those conclusions and far before the history is written. So that's just one point. I think that it likely won't be until after a Bitcoin standard and the dust has settled, where then people then can go back and say, well, the places that did the best through that transition were the people that were early. And one side of it, which I don't think it necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but I think almost inevitably it will be. Because one thing we didn't talk about in the uniqueness of Texas, we did talk about the energy, but you had the concept of Bitcoin per capita. But then what about hash rate per capita? That there is this relationship between cheap, reliable power and money, and that those two things compound each other. It's like you're not going to have a lot of cheap power without money. You're not going to have reliable power without good money. But then what good is money if you don't have this energy to build things, to have a trading economy? And so El Salvador is interesting because they're not a place that produces a lot of natural resources, but they do have other resources that they can trade. And there's nothing that really prevents them from building cheap power or getting natural gas, importing. But Texas does have this unique, I think even Stacy, who's a friend, somebody I respect a lot, Stacy Herbert, who's been so instrumental in guiding the Bitcoin policy of El Salvador. I think she actually first coined this, but Austin or Texas is the center of hash. And Drew Bonsall had written a Bitcoin astronomy piece of this idea of the center of hash, that, like trying to evaluate, whether somebody could mine Bitcoin on another planet, which honestly doesn't interest me that much, but there will be this natural kind of gravitational point around Bitcoin hash rate. And Texas does have this. Again, it's like there are other places that have massive deposits of energy that don't develop them like the state of Texas does, or have an energy grid like the state of Texas does that's detached from, or it's not detached, it's connected at certain points to the rest of the U.S., but it's also not regulated by the U.S. like the other grids are.
Mm-hmm.
And that those incentives create this stability, this relationship between Bitcoin tied in directly to the power system that I think will also be interesting for people to write about and observe of, how important the stability of power is to economic prosperity and other liberties, but how important Bitcoin is to those energy systems.
And so many interesting things in the Bitcoin space to be focused on. That's fascinating. Yeah, the history is written by the winners. Well, I'm going to start collecting receipts. I'm going to truly put some effort and time into trying to calculate those sets per citizen or Bitcoin per capita, and truly keep receipts for the years to come, and try to really keep track of those charts, because that will be interesting.
Yeah, I think we'll be telling. And the other thing is that, and this comes into the nature of what you do, but one of the unique things about Bitcoin, unique of all assets, people talk about like the mobility of capital. Well, and there's money, and then money is used as a tool to build physical capital, and money as a tool really isn't useful or valuable if we can't use it to build things that improve our day-to-day lives. That there really is no benefit to staring at our digital wealth. It's valuable in what it will allow us to trade, to produce. But the best form of money that existed previously was gold. And even if people don't have an appreciation for gold, they have to appreciate that the gold standard existed and that the dollar emerged off of gold, and that all fiat currencies practically did. Yes, silver had a role. But if you want to pick up and move from India and you have a bunch of gold, you physically can't take everything with you. But if I wanted to move to El Salvador and bring all of my Bitcoin with me, and then use that Bitcoin to trade within El Salvador, to pay people, to say, hey, let's build this restaurant, or let's build this power plant, I can do that. And so there's an incentive that exists greater than there ever has been before for that jurisdictional arbitrage, because jurisdictions can incentivize people with sound money to not only bring their human capital, but to bring their Bitcoin with them, to bring their sound money with them. And so I think because that exists, more people will look around and say, I see what El Salvador is doing. I don't necessarily understand this Bitcoin thing, but I need to understand it because it seems central, and they're attracting the right people. Maybe Texas is doing something similar, but not express related to Bitcoin. So I think that will happen, and the fact remains that you can either get Bitcoin by selling goods and services, or converting fiat. But realistically, even if you have fiat, it's because you've delivered some good or service. So you can either get it by trading, or by attracting people that have accumulated. And then it might actually be easiest to, at least from a foundational perspective, there's 19.8 million Bitcoin that are already in circulation, to say, hey, you early Bitcoiners that figured this out, that value freedom, that respect freedom, that saw this thing that was difficult to see earlier than most people, I think it'd be good if we attracted you to our place. Exactly. And even while like 10.8 Bitcoin seems like a lot of Bitcoin, what good is money if you're not living in a place that respects freedom?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, and while El Salvador is, you can look at it, mempool, they're stacking 1 Bitcoin every day. I'm witnessing how Bitcoiners with a lot more Bitcoin moving there every day.
well, here's a question: if they're stacking 1 Bitcoin, which we can see, and they're inevitably attracting citizens, why isn't the 10.8 Bitcoin? We should see some jumps, or maybe they should establish a separate mempool.space to show the 10.8 Bitcoin jumping, to show that the Bitcoiners are actually showing up.
My guess is the 1 Bitcoin a day is just a marketing showcase of
for
what
sure.
Bitcoin is what El Salvador
Yeah.
is doing.
They're doing more than enough. I'm just saying it would be
Yeah,
interesting
it
data
would
to
be.
see.
Yeah, definitely. And I was recently looking into this book by Rainer Zittelman. He basically goes through the process of seeing how Vietnam and Poland got out of poverty so quickly. Like after the World War II, after the fall of communism in the Eastern Bloc, like Poland was in absolute poverty. And how did they so quickly privatize property, and how the economic freedom obviously kicked them out of this poverty state. And today they're in a pretty good spot, consider their neighbors. So that made me think about
Well, what was it? Was it the privatization of property?
Basically, economic freedom. Yeah, how they like so quickly jump started the privatization process, etc. Well, that made me think. I lived through privatization process. I was born in '95 in Russia, post fall of Iron Curtains, post fall of USSR. And at the end of '90s, Russia started privatization. My dad was actually the first lawyer to complete the privatization process in my state. He had this correspondence with the prime minister of Russia at the time, which was super interesting. But what made me think is that is not full privatization. While we do have property rights, we also have property taxes. We also have all these assets that are still highly seizable, including the property in terms of your house, your real estate, as well as property like stocks and everything. Basically, everything is seizable. So, and yet, privatization process around the world has become this jump start of economic freedom and economic prosperity, the whole Adam Smith thing. So now Bitcoin is the second wave of privatization that makes it real. It's unseizable now. So that's like privatization on anabolics or on steroids, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a true economic freedom, true economic prosperity. And I'm here for it.
Yeah, same. And I think that, there's always going to be some way that people there's a purpose. Like in my view, there's a purpose of government. Like in many ways, it would be to establish private property rights and then order them and enforce them. But then how you're funding the government and whether property taxes are the right way, or then degrade those property rights. But that the existence now of Bitcoin that exists outside of that doesn't mean that a population couldn't decide to tax it, but the actual incentive will show, hey, if some jurisdiction is taxing this less, then the capital is truly mobile, and that buoying will hopefully incentivize more places to respect private property and to try to attract it, which I believe is inevitable.
Yeah.
There's a race.
I'm definitely in the front row of that, witnessing what Bitcoiners do to get to those places that don't tax Bitcoin.
Yeah, and people that deny that people will immigrate for a better life deny America. Yeah. And that people in America that believe that it will never change and that it doesn't need to be protected are also denying America. And so people will certainly follow those incentives. They've been doing it. I think about often, or I don't say often, but I think about, how people think about the fall of Rome. The people that would have gotten on a wooden ship in the 1500s to leave Europe to come to America for some reason that would bear that risk. And then the people got to America, and then a few hundred years later got settled, and then certain of those people said, we're going to go west, and they went to the Appalachians, and that was wrought with risk, and they settled that place, and then people followed them, and then some of those people said, we're going to go to Texas. And that people have been leaving their, anything that they'd ever known to go to other places in general in search of freedom. So that's history, and that, in many ways, Texas was the last frontier, wrought with risk. And so the way I think about Texas is people have been filtering into Texas from Europe and other places, but for 500 years, and take, leaving everything that they've ever known to do that and taking on risk with it. So that will only continue.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
Not in the 500 years, but the last 9 years was my search of freedom. And it's been 4 years. I'm absolutely loving Austin, loving Texas. As of right now, I found everything I need for my life and my family's life. Here, I'm truly enjoying it. But yeah, that was definitely a trip.
Well, the other day I was driving home and I was like, oh, that's Kitty's house. Yeah. It's nice having Bitcoiners, around. So yeah. We'll only attract more.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sitting down with me here today. It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, enjoyed this. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.